"Security, take your dirty hands off the CEO's daughter now." The words, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the stunned silence of the gala. Emmett Eldon didn't flinch. He kept his hand steady on the small shoulders of the girl in front of him. Maya. He'd seen her a few times, a whisper of a girl with bright, curious eyes. Now, those eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and relief, her breathing coming in ragged, whistling gasps. Just seconds ago, this room had been a symphony of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Now it was a frozen tableau of horror. The man who had shouted stood 10 feet away, a titan in a tailored suit, Magnus Wexler. His face, usually a mask of predatory charm, was twisted into an ugly mask of outrage. He was pointing, his finger an indictment. Emmett knew that face from magazine covers and from a darker, more personal place. A past he had buried under years of anonymity and the scent of industrial cleaner. Before Emmett could form a single word of defense, another figure burst through the ring of onlookers. Tess Grayston, the CEO, her face a canvas of pure terror. Her eyes, which usually held the cool command of a corporate leader, were wide and frantic. She saw what anyone would see, a low-level employee in a worn uniform with his hands on her child. She saw Magnus Wexler, a potential partner worth billions, looking on in righteous fury. Her mind, in a flash of maternal panic, connected the dots into the ugliest possible picture. "Get away from her." Tess's voice was a raw scream that ripped through the room. Emmett instinctively pulled his hands back as if burned. He raised them slowly, showing they were empty, harmless. "Ma'am, she was choking." "You're fired," Tess shrieked, her words echoing in the cavernous ballroom. The authority in her voice was absolute. "Get him out of my sight! Get him out of this building!" 2 security guards, their faces grim, were already moving toward him. Emmett's world tilted. Fired. The word was a punch to the gut. This job wasn't just a job. It was Joel's medicine. It was the roof over their heads. It was the fragile piece he had painstakingly built from the rubble of his former life. Maya, finding her voice, took a weak, trembling step toward her mother. "No, Mom," she rasped, her throat raw. He saved me." But Magnus Wexler was already moving, a serpent of smooth, calculated grace. He reached Maya first, enveloping her in a protective embrace. "Shh, it's all right, little one. You're in shock," he murmured, his voice a deep, calming rumble meant for Tess's ears. He guided Maya toward a quiet corner, effectively blocking her from her mother's view, his large frame a wall between the child's truth and the CEO's panicked misunderstanding. "She needs some water. The poor girl is traumatized." The security guard seized Emmett's arms in firm grips. The murmurs in the room were turning ugly. He could hear snippets. Disgusting. What was he thinking? He was no longer a person. He was a monster in a janitor's uniform. He locked eyes with Tess Grayston one last time, trying to convey the truth with a single look. But all he saw in her eyes was a mother's fear and a CEO's cold fury. They dragged him from the ballroom, through the service corridors he knew better than his own home. The familiar smell of polish now smelled like failure. Each step was a hammer blow, dismantling his life. He had acted. While everyone else had frozen, he had seen a child turning blue, and the doctor he used to be had taken over. He had saved her, and his reward was public humiliation and ruin. As they shoved him through the back exit and into the cold night air, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind him, Emmett's thoughts were not on the injustice. They were not on Magnus Wexler, the ghost from his past who had just reappeared to damn him once more. They were on his son, Joel, waiting at home, expecting his dad to walk in with a tired smile and maybe a leftover pastry from the gala. How was he going to tell him? Inside, the panic in the ballroom had subsided, replaced by a wave of relief. Tess Grayston knelt before her daughter, her hands fluttering over Maya's face. "Are you okay? Sweetheart, are you really okay?" Maya nodded, sipping the water Magnus had given her. "I'm okay, Mom. But you were wrong. The janitor—" "He was a hero," Magnus Wexler said, stepping up beside Tess. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I saw the whole thing. The man was a threat, and I acted. I'm just glad I was here to protect her." He was rewriting the narrative in real time, painting himself as the savior. Tess looked up at him, her breathing still uneven. "Thank you, Magnus. I don't know what I would have done." In that moment, he was her anchor. He had protected her child, but as she held Maya close, the little girl's words echoed in her ears. "He saved me." It didn't make sense. She looked down at her daughter, whose eyes were now clear and insistent. "Mom, you have to listen," Maya whispered. Before Tess could ask, a waiter approached, his face pale. "Mrs. Grayston, we found this on the floor by your table." He held out a small silver tray. On it was a single chewed piece of filet mignon, the exact size and shape to choke a child. Tess stared at it. The silence in her mind was suddenly deafening. She looked from the piece of meat to her daughter's earnest face, then to the triumphant, concerned expression on Magnus Wexler's. A cold, unsettling feeling began to creep up her spine. It was the feeling of a perfect narrative with one undeniable crack running right down the middle. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. Emmett's feet moved on autopilot, carrying him away from the glittering tower that now felt like a monument to his failure. The thin fabric of his uniform was no match for the biting wind, but he barely felt it. A deeper cold had settled in his bones, a familiar dread he hadn't felt in years. This job had been stable. It was anonymous. For 2 years, he had successfully been invisible, and that invisibility had been a shield. It had paid for the small apartment he shared with Joel. It had paid for the co-pays on the specialist visits and the expensive medications that helped his son breathe through the night. Now that shield was gone, shattered by an act of decency. He stopped at the corner of his street, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He couldn't walk into that apartment with this despair clinging to him like a shroud. Joel would see it instantly. Emmett forced his shoulders back, wiped the anguish from his face, and composed a mask of weary normalcy. He was just a father coming home from a long shift. That's all Joel needed to see. The apartment was small but clean, the warm light from a single lamp spilling into the hallway. Joel was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-finished drawing of a spaceship in front of him, his eyes on the door. An inhaler sat on the table next to his crayons. "Hey, buddy," Emmett said, his voice softer than he intended. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." Joel slid off the chair and ran to him, wrapping his arms around Emmett's legs. "I was waiting. You said you'd bring me a fancy dessert from the party." Emmett's heart cracked. The dessert. He knelt, forcing a smile. "Oh man, I'm so sorry, Joel. They ran out right at the end. Can you believe it? All those rich people ate every last brownie." Joel looked up, his brow furrowed, studying Emmett's face. "You look sad, Dad." "Just tired," Emmett lied, ruffling his son's hair. "It was a long night, lots of cleaning up." He stood, avoiding his son's perceptive gaze. "Come on, time for bed. You've got that checkup with Dr. Anya tomorrow, remember?" Joel nodded, but his eyes were still full of questions. As Emmett tucked him into bed, the boy's voice was a small whisper in the dark. "Did something bad happen at your work?" Emmett smoothed the blanket over his son's chest. "Nothing for you to worry about," he said softly. He sat by the bed until Joel's breathing evened out, the quiet rhythm of fragile reassurance in a world that had just been torn apart. Back at the Grayston Tower, the last of the guests were departing. Tess stood ramrod straight, a perfect hostess, but inside, her mind was a whirlwind. As soon as the final guest was gone, she turned to her head of security. "Find my daughter," she ordered, her voice clipped. "And Magnus Wexler. Bring them to my office, now." In her top-floor office, with the city lights spread out beneath her, she paced. The piece of meat, now in an evidence bag on her desk, seemed to mock her. A mistake was one thing. A mistake that involved her child, that resulted in the public humiliation of an innocent man. That was unforgivable. The door opened and Maya walked in, followed by Magnus. "Magnus, could you give us a moment?" Tess said, her tone leaving no room for argument. He smiled, a picture of understanding. "Of course." He closed the door, and Tess knelt in front of her daughter. "Maya, I need you to tell me everything that happened, from the very beginning." Maya's voice was steady. "I was eating. A piece got stuck. I couldn't breathe, Mom. I was so scared." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then, the janitor was there. He turned me around and he pushed on my stomach, right here." She pointed to a spot just below her sternum. "It hurt a little, but the food came out. I could breathe again. He saved my life." The words landed like stones in the pit of Tess's stomach. It was true. She had fired the man who had saved her daughter. She hugged Maya tightly, burying her face in her daughter's hair, shame and gratitude warring within her. After settling Maya on the office couch with a tablet, Tess opened the door. Magnus was leaning against the wall, checking his phone. He looked up with a concerned smile. Tess folded her arms, her gaze like ice. "Maya seems to think the janitor was helping her." Magnus didn't blink. He slid his phone into his pocket, his voice low and confidential. "Of course she does, Tess. She's a child. She's confused, trying to make sense of a traumatic event." The man was rough. He grabbed her. "She's likely conflating his actions with the relief of being saved, by me stepping in." He was so smooth, so reasonable, explaining away the truth with the cool confidence of a man who did it for a living. Tess stared at him. A few hours ago, she would have believed him. But now, seeing him so easily dismiss her daughter's words, a different feeling emerged. Suspicion, cold and sharp. "Thank you, Magnus," she said, her voice flat. "It's been a long night. We'll have to postpone our discussion about the partnership." "Naturally," he said. "Family first." After he left, Tess stood in her silent office for a long time. She walked to her desk and pulled up the company's employee database. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Search, Eldon, Emmett." A file appeared. It was pathetically sparse. Hired 2 years ago. Address in a low-income part of the city. No emergency contacts listed. Previous employment, warehouse loader. Before that, nothing. A digital ghost. There were no commendations, but more importantly, no complaints. The man she had called a monster. The guilt was a physical weight. She had done this. She had destroyed an innocent man's livelihood based on a lie from a man she now deeply suspected. Her jaw tightened. Tess Greystan always corrected her mistakes. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the contact for her head of security. She was going to find Emmett Eldon. And she was going to make this right. The next morning, the sun rose with a cruel, indifferent brightness. Emmett stood in his small kitchen, a box of cereal in his hand, moving with a hollowed-out precision. The routine was all that kept him anchored. Pour the cereal, slice the banana, check the milk. Normal. He had to be normal for Joel. His son was at the table, chattering about a science project, his laughter the only sound that mattered. But today, another noise kept breaking through. The frantic ticking of a clock in his head, counting down the seconds to ruin. After Joel left for school, Emmett sat at the table and opened his banking app. The number on the screen stared back at him, small and unforgiving. After rent was due, there would be enough for groceries and one more copay for Joel's inhalers. After that, nothing. The precarious ledge he and his son lived on had crumbled. He spent the next hour making a list of every janitorial service in the city. But every application form asked the same question. Reason for leaving previous position. What could he possibly write? Fired for saving the CEO's daughter. He was no longer just unemployed. He was unemployable. The story of the gala, even if it was just internal gossip, would have spread like a virus. He was trapped, gripped by a familiar, icy hopelessness. Meanwhile, Tess Grayston was already in her office, a fortress of glass and steel. She hadn't slept. Maya's words and Magnus's smooth lies had played on a loop in her mind. She had Emmett's address written on a notepad on her desk, a tangible symbol of her mission. She wouldn't send an assistant. She wouldn't delegate. This was a wound she had inflicted, and she would be the one to treat it. She grabbed her car keys, but her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Grayston." Her assistant's voice was strained. "Mr. Vexler is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Tess froze, her hand on the doorknob. Of course he was here. The shark was circling, unwilling to let his prize get away. "Send him in," she said, her voice cold. She walked back to her desk and sat, composing her features into a mask of professional calm. Magnus entered, all smiles and charisma, carrying 2 coffees from her favorite cafe. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, placing a cup on her desk. "I was worried about you after that incident." "We're fine," Tess said, not touching the coffee. "Maya is resilient." "I'm so glad," he said, settling into the chair opposite her. His tone shifted from concerned friend to shrewd businessman. "And now that the distraction is dealt with, perhaps we can focus on our partnership. My team is ready to sign today. We can put this behind us and celebrate a new, prosperous future." He was using the incident, her moment of weakness, as leverage. He had positioned himself as her protector, and he was calling in the debt. "The deal is still on the table, Magnus," she said carefully, watching him. "But my legal team needs to review the final draft one more time. Standard procedure." Magnus's smile didn't falter, but she saw a flicker of annoyance in his gaze. "Of course. But don't let them take too long. Opportunities like this are time-sensitive." He was giving her a deadline. He was trying to control her. The suspicion in her gut hardened into certainty. She spent another 10 excruciating minutes making polite conversation before finally getting him to leave. The moment the door closed, she grabbed her keys and strode out of the office. "Hold all my meetings," she said to her assistant without breaking stride. "I'll be back this afternoon." The drive to Emmett's neighborhood was a journey across a divide. The sleek high-rises of her world gave way to brick tenements with fire escapes zigzagging down their fronts. It was a part of the city she flew over but never touched. She found the building, a 5-story walk-up with a faded green awning. It was clean but worn down, a place that housed people who were just getting by. For a moment, she hesitated in her car. What was she going to say? "Sorry, I publicly humiliated you and destroyed your livelihood?" It felt so inadequate. Taking a deep breath, she got out. Her expensive heels seemed ridiculously loud on the cracked pavement. She walked up the concrete steps and entered the dim lobby, finding the name on the buzzer. E. Eldon, 3B. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, her heart pounding. She was the CAO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but standing in this quiet, dimly lit hallway, she felt completely out of her depth. She raised her hand and knocked. The sound was sharp in the silence. She waited, her mind racing. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe he would see her and slam the door in her face. He had every right to. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. But it wasn't Emmett Eldon standing there. It was a boy, no older than Maya, with large, serious eyes and the same quiet intensity she'd seen in the janitor's gaze. He looked up at this stranger in a designer coat, his expression a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Can I help you?" Joel Eldon asked, his voice clear and steady. Tess Grayston found herself looking down into a child's face, a mirror of the man she had wronged. The boy's eyes were a deep, steady brown, holding a quiet, watchful gravity that seemed too old for his small frame. For a heartbeat, she was speechless, her carefully prepared apology dissolving on her tongue. I'm looking for your father," she managed to say, her voice sounding foreign and intrusive in the quiet hallway. "Is Mr. Eldon home?" From deeper within the apartment, Emmett's voice called out, "Joel, who is it?" Don't open the door to strangers. The warning came a second too late. Emmett appeared behind his son, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He froze when he saw her. The weariness in his face was instantly replaced by a mask of cold shock. It was a look Tess had seen before, in the eyes of rivals she had just defeated. The look of a man bracing for another blow. He quickly put a protective hand on Joel's shoulder, gently guiding his son behind him. The gesture was clear. He was a shield, and she was the threat. "Ms. Grayston," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You're a long way from your office." The sheer force of his composure threw her. She had expected anger, shouting, maybe even tears. But this cold, impenetrable wall was worse. It was the calm of a man who expected nothing good from the world. "Mr. Eldon," she began, her own voice wavering slightly. "I came here to apologize. I was wrong. You saved my daughter's life, and I punished you for it. There is no excuse for what I did." She let the words hang in the air between them, a raw and honest admission. She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "An apology doesn't pay my rent, Ms. Grayston," he said, his voice as quiet and sharp as a razor. "It doesn't refill my son's prescription. It's a word. People like you use words to fix things so you can sleep at night. They don't change anything out here." The truth of his statement hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her guilt was a luxury. His reality was survival. "I want to offer you your job back," she said quickly, trying to offer something tangible. "With full back pay and a promotion, head of daytime maintenance, a significant raise." A bitter, humorless smile touched Emmett's lips as he shook his head. "Go back? Why?" "So your employees can whisper about the crazy janitor. So your friend Mr. Wexler can find another way to get rid of me." The name, Wexler, was a challenge. He was letting her know that he saw the full picture, that he knew this wasn't just her mistake, but Magnus's malice. "I know men like him," Emmett continued, his voice dropping lower, an old pain creeping into it. "I lost everything I ever worked for once because of a man like him. I won't let it happen to my son." He started to close the door. "Thank you for the apology, Ms. Grayston, but we have nothing more to discuss." The door was swinging shut, a final wooden rejection. Tess felt a surge of panic. This couldn't be how it ended. "Dad," Joel's small voice piped up from behind Emmett's legs. "You didn't tell her the important part." Emmett stiffened, his hand freezing on the doorknob. "Joel, go to your room." But the boy paid him no mind, his serious eyes fixed on Tess. "My dad used to be a doctor," he said, the words spoken with a simple, unwavering pride. "He knows how to save people. That's why he knew how to help your little girl." The world seemed to tilt. A doctor. The word clicked into place with an audible snap, explaining everything. The speed, the precision, the unnerving calm in a moment of crisis. It wasn't a lucky guess or a first aid class. It was muscle memory. It was expertise. Emmett shot a look at his son, a mixture of love and exasperation, then turned his gaze back to Tess. His eyes were dark with a history she couldn't begin to fathom. The wall was back up, higher than before. "He's a child. He misspoke," Emmett said curtly. But it was too late. The lie was transparent. Tess could see the truth standing right in front of her, hidden in a janitor's uniform. A doctor who lost everything, a doctor who Magnus Wexler recognized and wanted to crush. Emmett didn't wait for her to respond. He closed the door firmly in her face. The click of the lock echoed in the hallway, a sound of absolute finality. Tess stood there for a long moment, staring at the peeling paint on door 3B. Her mission to apologize had failed spectacularly. He didn't want her money or her job. He wanted to be left alone. She walked back down the stairs, her mind reeling. This was no longer about a simple, albeit terrible, mistake. This was a conspiracy. What had happened to him all those years ago? And what did it have to do with the deal Magnus was so desperate to push through? Sitting in her car, Tess Grayston realized the problem was infinitely bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Correcting her mistake was no longer enough. Now she had to uncover the truth. Her suspicion of Magnus Wexler had just blossomed into genuine chilling alarm. The moment the door clicked shut, Emmett leaned his forehead against the cool wood, his breath coming out in a shaky exhale. His carefully constructed dam had been breached. Tess Grayston had brought the world he'd fled right to his doorstep. "Dad, was that the lady from the party?" Joel asked from behind him. Emmett turned and knelt, taking his son by the shoulders. His fear was a sharp, metallic taste in his mouth. "Yeah, buddy, that was her." He looked into Joel's eyes, trying to impress upon him the gravity of the situation without scaring him. "Hey, remember how we have our special secret about my old job?" Joel nodded solemnly. "The doctor game." "That's right. It's a game we play, just you and me. We can't tell anyone else about it, okay? It's our most important rule." "But why?" "You were a hero," Joel insisted, his voice small. "You saved people." "I know," Emmett said, his voice thick with a pain he rarely allowed himself to feel. "But the game is important. It keeps us safe. Can you promise me you'll remember the rule?" "I promise," Joel whispered, leaning in to hug his father. Emmett held him tight. He had to get them out of here. But where could they go? He had no money, no allies, and a name that was now, once again, on the radar of a very powerful enemy. Back in her downtown office, Tess was a whirlwind of controlled fury. The janitor was a doctor. The fact was a key, and she was determined to find the lock it opened. She summoned Dorian, the head of her corporate security team. Dorian was a former intelligence officer, a man with a quiet demeanor and an unnerving ability to find information that didn't want to be found. "I need a deep background check," she said, sliding the notepad with Emmett's name across her desk. "Off the books, untraceable. I want to know everything about him, specifically if he ever held a medical license." Dorian glanced at the name, his expression unreadable. "Any specific reason?" "He saved my daughter's life," Tess stated flatly. "And I have reason to believe there's more to his story." Dorian nodded once. It was all he needed. "I'll get it done." As he left, an alert for an urgent email from Magnus Wexler popped up on her screen. He was pushing for the deal to be signed within 48 hours, citing a competing offer. It was a lie, a transparent attempt to force her hand before she could dig any deeper. She ignored it. Let him sweat. An hour later, Emmett's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered, a desperate hope for a job offer flickering in his chest. "Is this Emmett Eldon?" a gruff voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is the superintendent of your building. I just received a call from your previous employer, Grayston Industries. Something about a serious security breach. Gross misconduct. I run a quiet building here, Eldon. I don't want any trouble. I'm giving you notice. I want you and your kid out by the 1st of the month." The line went dead. Emmett stared at his phone, the blood draining from his face. It was happening. Wexler hadn't even waited a full day. He wasn't just trying to keep Emmett down, he was trying to erase him. He was making him homeless. The walls of the small apartment, his sanctuary, suddenly felt like they were closing in. He looked at the calendar. The 1st of the month was in 10 days. Late that afternoon, Dorian returned to Tess's office and closed the door behind him. He placed a single thin file on her desk. "You were right," he said, his voice low. He was a doctor, and not just any doctor. Tess opened the file. The first page was a printout of a magazine article from 5 years ago. Rising star surgeon accused of malpractice. Research fraud. The photo was of a younger Emmett Eldon, confident and smiling in a white lab coat. Dr. Emmett Eldon, a brilliant pediatric surgeon from Boston, renowned for his groundbreaking work in regenerative medicine for children with severe respiratory conditions. His license was revoked 5 years ago after being found guilty of falsifying research data, which resulted in a patient's death. He was ruined, Tess whispered, reading the damning words. Completely, Dorian agreed. But the evidence against him was almost too perfect. The key witness was a junior researcher on his team, a man named Kevin Lohman, who claimed Emmett pressured him to alter the data. Lohman gave his testimony and then vanished a week after the trial. Tess looked up, her eyes narrowing. And the research? What happened to the project? The hospital disavowed it. The patents were considered tainted by the scandal. They were sold for pennies on the dollar to a small, aggressive biotech firm willing to take the risk. Tess felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She already knew the answer, but she had to hear him say it. What was the name of the firm? Dorian slid another piece of paper across the desk. It was a corporate flowchart. At the bottom was the name of the small biotech company. An arrow pointed up to the larger company that had acquired it 2 years later, absorbing its assets. Tess's eyes followed the final arrow to the top of the chart, to the name of the parent corporation. Wechsler Pharmaceuticals. She stared at the name, the letters seeming to burn on the page. It all crashed down on her with horrifying clarity. The gala, the fake outrage, the pressure to sign the deal. Magnus hadn't just recognized a disgraced janitor. He had come face to face with the man whose life he had stolen. And now, he was trying to do business with her, using the very research he had acquired through fraud as a key asset in their merger. The name on the file seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Wechsler Pharmaceuticals. Tess leaned back in her chair, a wave of nausea washing over her. Magnus wasn't just a competitor. He was a predator who had feasted on the carcass of Emmett Eldon's life and was now serving the spoils to her on a silver platter. The groundbreaking technology he was offering was built on a foundation of stolen research, a ruined career, and a child's death. "He's been playing me from the beginning," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. The gala wasn't a coincidence. He saw Emmett and he panicked. The accusation, the scene he made, it was all a smokescreen to get Emmett thrown out before he could be recognized. "It's a strong motive," Dorian agreed, his face grim. "If Eldon's story ever came out, it would not only kill your deal but could trigger a federal investigation. It would unravel his entire empire." Tess slammed her fist on the desk. "So we go to the police. We tell them everything." Dorian shook his head slowly. "And say what?" "That we have a theory. The case against Eldon was airtight 5 years ago. Wechsler's connection is buried under 3 layers of acquisitions. Accusing a man like Magnus Wechsler without irrefutable proof, he'd sue you into oblivion and destroy your reputation. He'd win." He was right. They were in a corporate war zone, facing an enemy with an arsenal of tanks while they were armed with a single, unproven bullet. "Then we get proof," Tess said, her jaw set like concrete. "Find the witness, Kevin Lohman. Find out what Wechsler paid him. Find anything that connects Wechsler directly to the data falsification." Her fear was burning away, leaving behind a cold, hard rage. "Magnus Wechsler wants a deal in 48 hours. Let's see what we can find in 47 inches. While Tess was planning her counterattack, Emmett was fighting a battle on a much different front. The eviction notice was a death sentence to the fragile life he'd built. He spent the afternoon in a panic, calling other apartment complexes. But the moment he mentioned his employment status, the conversation ended. As the sun began to set, he watched Joel meticulously color in his drawing of a spaceship. Desperation gnawed at him. He had sworn he would never contact anyone from his old life. To them, he was a pariah, but he was out of options. He pulled out a worn address book from the back of a drawer, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. He stopped at one name, Dr. Eris Thorne, his former mentor, a brilliant, cantankerous old man who had been the most vocal in his disappointment 5 years ago. His hands shook as he dialed the number, praying it still worked. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Emmett hung up without leaving a message, the silence on the other end a confirmation of his status as a ghost. Later that evening, just as he was putting a plate of macaroni and cheese on the table for Joel, there was a knock at the door. Emmett froze, a paranoid flash of Magnus's men running through his mind. He crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was her, Tess Grayston. He threw the door open, his fear instantly eclipsed by anger. "I told you not to come back here." "I know," she said, her voice steady. She wasn't apologetic this time. She was intense, her eyes burning with a purpose that startled him. "But this is bigger than an apology now." She held up the thin file Dorian had given her. "I know who you are, Dr. Eldon, and I know what Magnus Wexler did to you." Emmett stared at her, stunned into silence. "He's trying to sell your research to my company," she continued, stepping past him into the apartment. "I need your help to stop him." The audacity of it left him breathless. First, she fired him, and now she was asking for his help to fight a monster he'd been running from for 5 years. Before he could tell her to get out, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was the landlord. Emmett's stomach twisted. He answered, ready for a fight. "Hello?" Mr. Eldon." The superintendent's gruff voice was now laced with a nervous tremor. "Listen, there's been a terrible misunderstanding about that phone call. My lawyer just called me. Something about slander and unlawful eviction. I'm so sorry. Please, forget I said anything. You can stay. Of course you can stay." Emmett lowered the phone, his mind reeling. He looked from the phone in his hand to Tess, who was standing in the middle of his living room, watching him. She said nothing, her expression calm, but her message was as clear as a signed confession. "I can protect you." She had fixed his eviction with a single phone call. She had wielded her power not as a weapon against him, but as a shield for him. He was faced with a choice that made his head spin. He could slam the door, take this small victory, and continue running. Or he could trust the woman who had fired him, the woman who was now offering him a chance to do the one thing he had only ever dreamed of: fight back. For a long moment, the only sound in the apartment was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Emmett looked from the phone in his hand to the powerful woman standing in his living room. Tess Grayston hadn't just apologized. She had demonstrated her power, not with a checkbook, but with a shield. He glanced over at Joel, who was watching them with wide, intelligent eyes. He had spent 5 years running to protect that little boy. But now, he realized, running wasn't safety anymore. It was just a slower death. Emmett took a deep breath and made a decision. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help you." Tess's shoulders relaxed in a barely perceptible wave of relief. "Thank you. My security team is already—" "But let's be clear," Emmett cut her off, his gaze sharp. "This isn't about your company or your deal. This is about what Magnus Wexler took from me. It's about the patient who died because of his greed. And it's about my son's future." Tess met his gaze without flinching. "Understood, Doctor. Eldon." The title, spoken aloud for the first time in 5 years, felt strange on his own skin. It was the name of a ghost. The next day, Emmett found himself in a world he had forgotten existed. Tess hadn't brought him to her gleaming office, but to a discreet, unmarked building in the city's financial district. Inside was a secure conference room that Dorian had converted into a war room. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with corporate flowcharts and timelines. Tess, Emmett, and Dorian spent the next few hours pooling their knowledge. Tess laid out the details of the Wexler deal and the 48-hour deadline that now loomed over them. Dorian presented the digital ghost of Kevin Lohman, the vanished witness. "He's been careful," Dorian explained, pointing to a screen. "New identity, cash-only life." "He had a weakness," Emmett said, staring at a photo of the younger Lohman, a nervous-looking man with weak eyes. "Gambling debts, and his grandmother. He was devoted to her, lived in a nursing home up in Vermont. He used to send her most of his paycheck." Dorian's fingers flew across his keyboard. "A nursing home in Vermont. That's a thread. A good one." As Dorian worked, Emmett's phone rang. It was Dr. Anya, Joel's pulmonologist. Emmett stepped into the hall to take the call. Tess watched him through the glass, his back rigid, his posture growing more tense with every passing second. When he came back in, his face was pale, his earlier resolve overshadowed by a raw, paternal fear. "What is it?" Tess asked. "It's Joel," Emmett said, his voice barely a whisper. "His latest tests. His condition is worsening. The standard treatments aren't as effective anymore." He sank into a chair, looking utterly defeated. "Doctor," Anya mentioned a new experimental treatment. "Very promising, but it's not covered by insurance. The cost is astronomical." Tess felt the weight of his words. This wasn't just about justice anymore. For Emmett, this was now a matter of life and death for his son. Vengeance was a luxury, but a cure was a necessity. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice firm with a promise she had no idea how to keep. "Ms. Grayston?" Dorian's voice cut through the heavy silence. He turned his laptop around. "I think I've got him." On the screen was a grainy security camera photo, dated 2 days ago, of a man buying a newspaper. He was older, heavier, with a beard, but the nervous eyes were unmistakable. It was Kevin Lohman. "The nursing home still gets an anonymous cashier's check every month," Dorian explained. "Sent from a post office in a little town in rural Maine called North Haven. This security footage is from the gas station across the street. He's been hiding there under the name David Miller for the last 3 years. They had him. They had found their ghost." A tense silence filled the room. Their 48-hour clock was ticking down. "We can't send the authorities," Dorian said. "The moment he sees a badge, he'll run. Wexler might even have him silenced permanently. We get one shot at this." Emmett stood up, his fear for Joel now forged into a hard, sharp resolve. He looked from the photo of Lohman to Tess. "I have to go," he said, his voice ringing with a certainty that startled them all. "He won't talk to you. He won't talk to the police. But he has to see my face. He needs to look at the man whose life he helped Magnus Wexler destroy." Tess nodded, her decision instantaneous. "You're right, but you're not going alone." She grabbed her coat. "I'm going with you." Emmett stared at her, a CEO in a bespoke suit ready to drive to the backwoods of Maine. For the first time, he saw her not as a symbol of the world that had cast him out, but as an ally. "Dorian," Tess said, already heading for the door. "Buy us more time. Stall Wexler. Tell him our servers are down for an emergency audit. Tell him whatever you have to. We're going to North Haven." The drive north was a strange, suspended reality. The dark highway unspooled before the headlights of Tess's luxury sedan, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an endless forest. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine. Hours ago, they had been adversaries separated by a chasm of wealth and power. Now, they were co-conspirators, hurtling toward an unknown confrontation. Emmett stared out the passenger window, watching the dark trees blur into a solid wall. The analytical mind of Dr. Eldon was piecing together a strategy, but it was tangled with the raw fear of a father. Joel's face was a constant image behind his eyes. "Tell me about him," Tess said, her voice quiet. "Your son." Emmett hesitated. He hadn't spoken about Joel to anyone, not really. But looking at the woman beside him, he didn't see a CEO. He saw an ally, a mother who had felt the same terror he lived with every day. "He's brilliant," Emmett said, the word catching in his throat. "He wants to be an astrophysicist, draws pictures of nebulae, and tries to explain quantum mechanics to me." A sad smile touched his lips. "And his lungs. They've been weak since he was born. The condition is progressive. My research, the project Wexler stole." He trailed off, the weight of the confession too heavy to speak aloud. Tess understood the unspoken words. It could have cured him. The crime Magnus had committed wasn't just corporate theft. It was personal. It had a face, and it was the face of a little boy who dreamed of stars he might never live to see. "We're going to get him, Emmett," Tess said, and it wasn't a promise from a CEO. It was a vow from one human being to another. Her phone buzzed on the console, a text from Dorian. Phase 1 of the stall is in effect. Vexler is furious but believes the server crash story for now. He's threatening legal action if the deal isn't signed by noon tomorrow. Clock is ticking. Tess showed the screen to Emmett. Noon tomorrow. That's less than 12 hours. They arrived in North Haven just as the first hint of a bleak, gray dawn began to silhouette the pines. The town was little more than a single main street with a gas station, a diner, and a post office. A place where secrets could be buried under a blanket of snow and silence. Dorian's information led them to a dirt track that wound into the woods. At the end of it, nestled in a clearing, was a small, dilapidated cabin with a wisp of smoke curling from its chimney. "That's it," Tess said, parking the car far enough away to be hidden by the trees. They watched the cabin for an hour as the sun climbed higher. There was no movement. "We can't wait," Emmett said finally, his voice tense. "The longer we're here, the more likely someone is to notice this car. I'm going alone. You stay here. Keep the line open with Dorian." "Emmett, no, it's too dangerous. It's more dangerous if he sees you," he countered, his logic sharp and undeniable. "He'll see a powerful woman and bolt. But me? He knows me. He owes me. I have to be the one to face him." Tess reluctantly agreed. She passed him a small earpiece. "Stay on the line. The second it goes wrong, I'm calling in the state police. Consequences be damned." Emmett nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. He got out of the car, the cold air a shock to his system. He walked slowly down the muddy track toward the cabin. Each step was a step back in time, back towards the life that had been stolen from him. The woods were unnervingly quiet. He reached the warped wooden porch and stepped onto it, the boards groaning under his weight. He took a final, steadying breath and raised his hand to knock. Before his knuckles could touch the wood, the door was yanked open. Kevin Lohman stood in the doorway, his face a pasty, terrified mess. He was holding a half-packed duffel bag, but his wide, panicked eyes weren't looking at Emmett. They were looking past him, into the woods. "I told you," Lohman stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "I told you they'd find me." Emmett's blood ran cold. They? From the shadows inside the cabin, a second man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a calm, menacing smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. "Well, well," the stranger said, his voice a low, chilling rumble. "Look what the cat dragged in. Dr. Eldon, we were just talking about you." He took a step out onto the porch, revealing what he held in his hand. It wasn't a gun. It was a phone, and on the screen, a video call was active. The face on that screen, smiling with the cold triumph of a predator that had just cornered its prey, was Magnus Vexler. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Magnus's voice crackled through the phone's tiny speaker. "It seems my 48-hour deadline was just the motivation you needed. You've walked right into the fire, Doctor, and this time there's no one here to save you." The world went silent. Through the tiny earpiece, Tess heard the sickening crunch of plastic being crushed under a heavy boot. Then, nothing. Just the frantic thumping of her own heart in the dead quiet of the car. "Emmett?" she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Emmett, can you hear me?" Only static answered. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed Dorian. "He's got him," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Vexler has him. There was another man in the cabin. It was a trap." "Stay in the car, Tess." Dorian's voice was a firm, grounding presence. "Do not approach the cabin. Do not call the local police. Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" "Dorian, they have him." "I know," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "And Vexler will have a story ready. A disgruntled former employee trespassing, a private security matter. The local sheriff will escort you out of town, and Vexler's man makes Emmett and Lohman disappear for good. We have to play this smarter." "Then what do we do?" she cried, feeling utterly helpless. "You stay hidden and you keep your eyes on that cabin," Dorian commanded. "I'm working on something. Just give me a minute." Inside the cabin, the air was thick with fear. Emmett's hands were bound behind his back with a heavy-duty zip tie, pulled painfully tight. The man, who Magnus had called Silas, was built like a refrigerator, his movements calm and efficient. He had taken Emmett's phone and wallet, placing them on a dusty table next to his own phone, where Magnus Wexler's face still loomed, smiling. Kevin Lohman was huddled on a threadbare couch, sobbing. "That was foolish, Doctor." Magnus's voice crackled from the phone. "Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye on my loose ends? I've had a man watching our friend Kevin here for 5 years. The moment you were fired, I knew your CEO would start digging. Predictable." Emmett said nothing, his mind racing, searching for an angle. "That research," Magnus mused, savoring his victory. "It was so brilliant. It was so easy to change, you know. A few keystrokes in the database, a fat check to your weak-willed friend here, and an empire was born. All I needed was a villain for the story. You played the part beautifully." It was a confession, delivered with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. "What do you want?" Emmett growled. "I want what I've always wanted," Magnus said. "Everything, but I'm a reasonable man. Here are the terms." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes like chips of ice. "Tess Grayston will sign our deal by noon. No more delays. Once the ink is dry, you and Kevin will be given new lives. New names, a generous bank account, and a one-way ticket to somewhere you will never be heard from again." "And if she refuses?" Emmett asked, though he already knew the answer. Magnus's smile vanished. "Then Silas will be forced to clean up this situation, and my associates will pay a visit to a little boy who loves to draw spaceships. I hear Joel's health is fragile. It would be a tragedy if his father's actions led to a complication." The threat, delivered so coldly, landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just his life on the line. It was Joel's. Magnus had him checkmated. "Silas will stay with you until the deadline," Magnus concluded. "I'll be in touch." The screen went black. Back in the car, Tess was staring at the silent cabin, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at her to floor the gas and crash through the front door. Dorian's warning was the only thing holding her back. Her phone buzzed. It was him. "I've got something," Dorian said, his voice tight with urgency. "The man in the cabin, Silas. He's ex-military, a freelance enforcer, but he's running a program on his phone, a stealth audio recorder streaming to a secure cloud server. It's his insurance policy. Proof of his orders in case Wexler ever tries to cut him loose. Can you get into it?" Tess breathed, a wild hope flaring in her chest. "I'm already past the first firewall. He's good, but I'm better. Just hold on." The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, Dorian's voice came back on the line, sharp and clear. "I'm in. I have a live audio feed from inside the cabin, forwarding it to your phone now." A moment later, her phone chimed. She put it on speaker, and the cabin's interior filled her car. She could hear Lohman's muffled sobs, Silas's heavy breathing, and then Magnus's voice, as clear as if he were sitting beside her, delivering his cold, venomous threat against Joel. She listened to the entire monologue, to the confession, to the impossible ultimatum. When the audio feed returned to near silence, she was holding an atomic bomb in the palm of her hand. An audio file. A recording of Magnus Wexler confessing to corporate fraud, admitting to framing Emmett, and threatening the life of a child. She had the proof. Ironclad. Undeniable. But the noon deadline was only a few hours away, and Silas was in that cabin with his orders. If she released the recording, Wexler would be ruined. But would he give the order to eliminate the witnesses before the authorities could get there? She was holding the key to Emmett's freedom and Magnus's destruction, but using it could be the very thing that signed Emmett's death warrant. The recording ended, leaving a damning silence in its wake. Tess sat frozen in the driver's seat, the engine's low hum a counterpoint to the frantic pounding in her ears. She had him. She had Magnus Wexler's entire corrupt empire captured in a 2-minute audio file. But Emmett and a terrified witness were in a cabin with a professional killer, and the noon deadline was now less than 3 hours away. "Dorian," she said into the phone, her voice a low, steady instrument of command that surprised even herself. "He's overplayed his hand. He thinks he's in control. We're going to use that." "What's the plan?" Dorian asked, his tone all business. "A cornered animal is the most dangerous," Tess said, thinking aloud. "If we release this file now, he'll have nothing left to lose. He'll give the kill order. We have to make him think he's won." "The deal," Dorian said, understanding immediately. "You're going to make him think you're caving." "Exactly. I'm going to call him and agree to his terms. I'll arrange a face-to-face meeting at my office at 11:45 a.m. to sign the final documents. That gets him out of his fortified bunker and onto my turf. It's a huge risk, Tess. He'll have his own security. And I'll have you," she countered. "And I'll have this." She glanced at her phone, at the audio file. "It's the only way to get him to call off his man before the authorities even know what's happening." Inside the cabin, Emmett was working on the only variable he could control. Kevin Lohman. The man was a quivering wreck, muttering about how they were both dead. Silas, the enforcer, sat impassively in a chair by the door, cleaning a hunting knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic shing shing shing, a nerve-shredding soundtrack to their captivity. "Listen to me, Kevin," Emmett whispered, his voice intense. "Panicking is what he wants. He's going to get rid of us either way. You know that, don't you? A man like Vexler can't afford to leave witnesses. Our only chance is to make a move. Together." "A move?" Lohman squeaked, his eyes wide with terror. "Against him?" He gestured with his head toward Silas. "He'll kill us before we take 2 steps. "Maybe," Emmett conceded. "But we die fighting. I'm not going to die on my knees waiting for a monster to decide my son's fate. Are you?" The question hung in the air. For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in Lohman's eyes. A spark of shame. The drive back to the city was a high-speed race against the clock. Tess drove with a focus she hadn't felt since her company's IPO, her mind a chessboard, calculating every move. Dorian, working remotely, was her unseen queen, positioning his pieces. He alerted a trusted contact high up in the FBI's white-collar division, feeding him a heavily redacted tip and telling him to have a tactical team on standby. He also quietly positioned his own elite security team on the executive floor of Greyston Tower. At 11:44 a.m., Magnus Vexler strode into Tessa's office. He was the picture of triumph, his suit immaculate, his smile radiating smug satisfaction. He placed a leather-bound portfolio on her polished desk. The final contract. "I'm so glad you saw reason, Tess," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "For a moment there, I thought you were going to let sentiment cloud your judgment. A fatal error in our world." Tess didn't rise to greet him. She sat behind her desk, her face a calm, unreadable mask. "There's just one final term to discuss before I sign." Magnus raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I was under the impression our negotiations were concluded." "This is a new development," she said. She tapped the screen of her phone, which was connected to the office's conference speakers, and she played the recording. Magnus's smug smile froze as his own voice filled the room, confessing to fraud, to framing Emmett, to threatening a child. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, ugly shade of red. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, then narrowing into slits of pure hatred. "You," he hissed, lunging across the desk, his hands reaching for her phone. He never made it. 2 of Dorian's plainclothes security guards emerged from a connecting room, their movements swift and silent, blocking his path. "Is this your signature, Magnus?" Tess asked, her voice dripping with ice. "You think this will save you?" He snarled, backing away. "You release that, and your janitor is dead before the first news van arrives." "I know," Tess said calmly, "which is why the full unedited file is currently on a server with a dead man's switch. My man Dorian is monitoring my vitals. If his system doesn't receive a vocal safe code from me in the next 3 minutes, That file is automatically sent to the FBI, the SEC, and the top 3 news agencies in the country. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But before that happens, you are going to pick up your phone. You are going to call Silas. You will tell him to release Emmett Eldon and Kevin Lohman, unharmed. You will tell him the deal is off and that he is to walk away. Right now. She gestured to her own phone, where Dorian's live audio feed was still active. And I'll be listening to make sure you get the message right. Checkmate. Magnus was trapped, his entire world collapsing. He looked from the guards, to the phone playing his own damning words, to the woman who had so thoroughly outmaneuvered him. His hand, trembling with a rage that seemed to shake his entire body, reached for his phone. He dialed. The phone was answered on the first ring. Magnus's voice was a choked, venomous rasp. Silas, it's over. Let them go. Tess listened on the open audio feed. Her own breathing hitched in her throat. She heard Magnus's clipped command, followed by a moment of tense silence from the cabin. Then, Silas's low rumble. Understood. A click. The line from Magnus's phone went dead. Through Dorian's feed, she heard movement, a metallic scrape. The keys are for the truck out back, Silas's voice said, flat and emotionless. Don't follow me. The sound of the cabin door opening, then closing, and then quiet. Emmett? Tess spoke into her own phone to Dorian. Dorian, ask him if he's okay. A moment later, a voice crackled back through the feed, shaky but clear. It was Emmett. We're okay. He's gone. Lohman is here. We're both okay. The relief that washed over Tess was so immense, it almost buckled her knees. Dorian, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Code Alexandria. Safe. It was done. In her office, Magnus Vexler seemed to deflate, the rage in his eyes replaced by the hollow look of utter defeat. He had heard Emmett's voice through the speakers. He knew he had lost. As if on cue, the doors to her office suite slid open, and a group of stern-faced men and women in dark suits streamed in. FBI. Magnus stared at them, his face ashen. He looked back at Tess, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. You'll find Mr. Vexler's phone contains a recent call to a known felon. Tess informed the lead agent without looking at Magnus. And a certain audio file on my server contains a full confession to corporate fraud, conspiracy, and a threat against a minor. As they cuffed Magnus Vexler, his empire crumbling around him, he shot one last look at Tess, a look of pure, venomous hatred. She met it with nothing but cold, quiet resolve. Dorian had timed a final call perfectly. As Magnus was escorted through the grand lobby of Greystone Tower, news cameras flashed, capturing the humiliating downfall of a titan. In the small cabin in Maine, Emmett cut the zip tie from Kevin Lohman's wrists with Silas's discarded knife. The man was a mess, weeping with a mixture of terror and relief. I'm so sorry, Emmett, he sobbed. He threatened my family. I never wanted... I know, Emmett said, his voice weary but free of malice. He looked at the man he had once despised, and all he saw was another victim. It's over now, Kevin. You just have to tell the truth. 2 weeks later, the world looked different. The news was saturated with the Vexler scandal. Vexler's assets were frozen, his company in free fall. Kevin Lohman, the star witness for the prosecution, was in federal protective custody, but in a quiet, sterile examination room at the city's top pediatric hospital, none of that mattered. Emmett sat beside Joel, his hand resting on his son's small back. Tess sat on the other side, looking not like a CEO, but like a friend. The new therapy is remarkable, the specialist, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Alvey, was saying, pointing to scans on her screen. Joel's lung capacity has already improved by 12%. With this continued treatment, the prognosis is exceptionally good. The words hung in the air, full of a hope Emmett hadn't dared to feel in years. He looked at Tess, his eyes conveying a gratitude too deep for words. The experimental treatment was being fully funded by the newly established Maya Caldwell Foundation, a charitable wing of Grayston Industries. Later that afternoon, they sat on a park bench, watching Joel chase a soccer ball with other kids. He was running without gasping, a wide, carefree smile on his face. "The medical board is reopening your case," Tess said softly. "With Lohman's testimony, it's a formality. They said your license could be reinstated within the year." Emmett watched his son, a lump forming in his throat. His name. He was going to get his name back. "I don't know what to say, Tess." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "But I do have a question. When your name is cleared, what will you do?" He shrugged. "Find a hospital that's willing to take a chance on a doctor who's been out of the game for 5 years, I guess." "I have a better offer," she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a portfolio. It was a proposal for a new, independent bioethics and research division within Grayston Industries. The proposed director, Dr. Emmett Eldon. "Grayston Industries needs a conscience doctor," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think the position is long overdue." Emmett stared at the proposal, at his own name printed in clean, bold letters. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to finish his work, to build something good from the wreckage of his past. Joel came running over then, his face flushed with joy, the soccer ball tucked under his arm. "Dad, did you see that goal? Tess, did you see it?" "We saw it, buddy," Emmett said, his voice thick, wrapping an arm around his son. He looked at Tess, her eyes shining in the afternoon sun, and he saw not just an ally, but a partner. They were a strange, unlikely trio. The disgraced doctor, the powerful CEO, and the little boy who dreamed of the stars. They had been brought together by injustice, but here, in the peace of a sunlit park, they felt less like survivors and more like a family. "I accept," Emmett said, his gaze shifting from Tess to the bright, hopeful face of his son. The past was a scar, but it no longer had to be a cage. His work wasn't finished. In fact, it was just beginning. And there we have it, a quiet moment in time, shared between us. Before it fades, I'm curious. What's the atmosphere where you are right now? A peaceful evening, the middle of a busy day, a long drive at dawn. I love getting a small glimpse into the world where these stories are heard. If you enjoy sharing these moments of escape, consider subscribing and ringing that bell. It's the surest way to guarantee we can set aside time for another one soon. Your support, even just a like, makes all of this possible. Thank you again for your time, truly. Wishing you a good one, wherever you are.